Our first speaker in this afternoon session is Lionel Bovier. He's a director of Museum of Contemporary Art in Geneva, and he's going to speak about the Fluxus archive that is a part of a MAMCO collection. So thank you so much, Lionel, for being with us here today. Yes, and over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you. What you see is an image of the Ecart archive in the museum. For a few years now, we have decided to host this archive that belongs to John Armleder to explain a little bit why and how I need to do a little step back in history. Ecart was a group of artists, an independent space, and a publishing company that was founded in Geneva in 1969 by John Armleder, Patrick Lucchini, and Claude Richner. It was first sought as an extension of their non-artistic activities. They were a group of friends, and they made an Ecart from doing what they were normally doing, which is rowing, taking tea, taking some strolls in the city, etc. It became a reference point for the distribution of Fluxus and Fluxus history in Europe and many other art practices associated with conceptual art, performance, mail art, etc. throughout the 70s. It lasted until John Armleder's own career became too important for himself to continue to have such an important collective activity, which means 1981. It opened with a festival of happenings, but the gallery devoted exhibitions to various backgrounds of artists, Daniel Spöri, Georges Brecht, Ben, Ken Friedman, André Todt, among others, while the Ecart editions published Robert Filiu, Lorenz Wiener, Maurizio Nanucci, Sarkis, and many other artists. If you add to this the organization of Dada and Fluxus recitals, the group's own artistic activities, and the opening of a bookshop that was very important for the French-speaking part of Switzerland, as it was distributing artist publications, periodicals, etc., that were not easy to find at the time, you start to have an idea and take a measure of the output of this collective and why it became a reference point in what Robert Filiu called the eternal network. At the heart of Ecart's activities, there were a number of clusters of interest that were quite distributed in the period, and I just want to name a few of them. There was, of course, the central role given to printed matter. It might not show here, but a lot of the elements that we found in the archives were printed matters of all kinds, from flyers to books to various documents, posters, etc. Prints, of course, editions. Another important element was a reflection on the performative paradigm that was dominant at the time. It prevailed by Fluxus, but it was also very important in the same way by conceptual art and, of course, performance art, which is the enactment of a score rather than a finished and closed object, to put it simply. The role of the collective and the various delegations of authorship that was allowed through this type of activity was particular to Ecart. I mean, it was mostly organized around John Armleder, which was the main artistic figure of that group of people. But it was a collective, and they were sharing decisions. They were doing collective performances, actions, etc. So it is a different type of archive than if you have one collector, as we've seen, or one curator. then you have many people, and it's also a source of enrichment today of the archive, because some of the former colleagues of John have kept a few things that they want to donate, or they want to exchange, or they want to see represented within the archive. The last thing, which was prevalent to the entire generation of artists, was the concept of information, title of the exhibition by Kynaston McShine at MoMA in 1970, which put the concept of exchange systems at the heart of the production of the time in the art world. So it was bridging together various tendencies of contemporary art of time, and not trying to pinpoint it to Fluxus or to conceptual art, but really, I mean, showing that it was something that was very important and structurally important in the generation. Now, you must wonder, why is it in the museum? So that brings a little bit of institutional history. It started as a research project that I did during my studies at the University of Geneva. I had met John Armleder at the beginning of the 90s. I was very impressed by his practice as an artist, and I discovered that he was, in fact, someone who had a previous activities that was not published. And that was the work that he was doing together with his friends around Ecart. There was also the festivals he was participating to, the performances he was giving, which were not taken in account in a classic monographic development of a career, which is market driven. We are in the 1990s, so from the 1980s on, everything is market driven, as you know. I started the research by receiving information by John Armleder, and soon I was loaded with boxes of additional information. There's something wrong?
No.
Okay. And so to do my thesis, I had to dig into the archives that John had kept. You have to understand that for an artist, and I think it's true for many collectors as well, you keep everything. You don't select. So it's a little bit like a time capsule by Andy Warhol. When your desk is full, you take a box and you put everything that is on the table into the box. Eventually, you put a date on it, but that was not the case for John. So I started to dig into that for quite a time, until I understood that I couldn't encompass the entire material alone. So I found a deal with the museum to give me a space where I could open everything and filter the things I needed for my thesis, which was basically making a chronology of activities, everything that was published, organized, curated by Ecart, every publications they were referenced to, etc. In the meantime, I crossed many other things that I couldn't dig into in details. So after the thesis, I thought it would be a good idea to continue to work on. I expected the museum to be interested to storage the archive if there would be against a form of exchange, like an exhibition, which I curated in 1997 at both MAMCO, it just opened 3 years before, and at the print room of the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire in Geneva, which is a more patrimonial museum, where my friend Christophe Chérix was working at the time. So I associated with him to curate 2 exhibitions, one that was more or less an inventory of the printed matters, and the other one, which was an history of the gallery, an history of the bookshop, an history of the practices of the group, and also a reenactment of some installations, scores, etc. And then I left Geneva for other things. So the archive stayed at the 2 museums, which didn't find the time to continue to take care of them. They moved them several times. You can imagine if you work in an archive what that means. That means that the simile order you found is destroyed. And when I came back to Geneva unexpectedly to take over the museum, the MAMCO, where I did this show in 97, I saw of these archives and I wanted to do something for them. So I convinced the school of Geneva, the head, to build a research project together that would allow myself to pay for someone to reorganize the archive. And did this time with the idea that this archive would end up at MAMCO as more or less what you see on this image, which is a room that you can work on the archive. You can also work from the outside. It's not open to the public, but it's visible for the audience. And that would allow to be a matrix for other exhibitions to happen. Basically, that step happened over the last years, and there was a researcher, Elisabeth Jobin, who did this amazing job of organizing properly the archive. I will come back to that a bit later. And then we installed it, I think, in 2020 within the museum in that form. The methodology is what I wanted to talk about, and maybe that's why it could be a discussion later on, was based on 3 points. The first, and it's 3 assumptions on my end. Do not separate the items. That's against the institutional impulse of finding categories that would fit every object, even creating categories to put the object somewhere, to classify them, to organize them. I don't want to organize anything. Do not inventorize like a museum would, because from chaos emerge chains encounters, emerge discussions, dialogues that you will kill by making a perfect inventory, meaning you don't go to the shelves, you go to your own list of things and trying that you understand and encompass everything from that list. Plus, as it has been noted here before, the fluidity of the status of these objects makes it a vain exercise. I mean, a document can be an artwork or a personal note or a drawing, or, I mean, there's not a fixed status to any of these objects. At least that's the way I see them, and that's why they're sympathetic to me. It's because they escape a clear category, they escape a clear definition, and they are mutable, they're in flux, which kind of makes sense. And the third thing was to try to think the archive as a matrix for exhibitions to come, for projects to be realized. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of that. If I manage to, yeah, that's a show we realized with scores and works by Ecart artists. So you have some elements that looks like sculpture or installation. You have the tape or the table that you don't really see, which are basically scores exhibited by artists at the Ecart Gallery. You have a piece by John Armleder, which is one of his early works that is kept within this archive. We organized exhibitions that reproduced what the strategies, the display strategies that the gallery had worked on. For instance, this show was called CV Art Not Show by David Zach. It was about nail art and the correspondence that was so impressively active during the 70s between artists from all over the world. It resulted into an edition that Ecart published, but there were some elements that we kind of liked in their display strategies, like this big CV made out of the pages of the edition, rubber stands by artists that you could use as a member of the audience, etc. And another and last element, that's a book that was in production from 1972 to 1974-5 at Ecart by Hervé Fischer. Hervé Fischer made the first book about rubber stamp by artists and communication, made art, we call it communication marginale. And he wanted to make a second volume, which would be consisting of mostly artist rubber stamps, so a collection of rubber stamps by artists, and some text to analyze them. As many of these books and projects of the time, it started, but it was in an indefinite space of not really being finished. There was always something missing. There was always more contributions. They were continuously receiving elements by artists who wanted to be part of the project. So they started to print at the same time they were still doing the editorial. So we found in the last stages of the organization of the archive, boxes and boxes of printed sheets that Ecart did and never bound. And then I spent a couple of really nice days in the summer with Elisabeth to organize what we could from that and try to make a possible book to be bound after the show. Actually, almost 700 copies, but of course, unfinished. So it's like a fixed state of the time. So it's a book that was printed in the 70s till the mid 70s and bound in 2019, for instance, with just a cover to put it together. All of this, I must precise, is co-curated with John Armleder. That's one particular element of this archive. It is an artist archive. It belongs to him. He can add or remove things, and I'm cool with this from the museum part, until he dies. After that, the archive is closed, at least from his point of view. Other friends might add some things, and remove might be an issue. And the museum has the responsibility to do something with it, to make it accessible to the audience, to research, etc. It's a different way of dealing than what I do with the concrete poetry collection that we bought and that we built into a cabinet, which is basically very easy to sort out alphabetically by journals or places of production. I mean, it's like a library, even if it consists of originals and printed matters, etc. It has a certain fluidity, but it's basically easy to organize. This archive, my assumptions that I just said, is that he would break it somehow to organize it perfectly. And I think that's what interested John. That's what made him, in a way, happy that it would be accessible, but it would be in a shape that is in flux, and it would generate projects that we didn't even think of. So every time there's someone like Aga who comes out in the archive and look for something, she also finds out other things that she didn't expect to find, or that she didn't even want to find. She asks questions about certain elements. Why is it there and not there? And that is part of what that consists for me into a Fluxus archive. It has to adapt to the subject matter. I think we had a good quote this morning. It's making the archive like the art it archives. I think it's a good way of, saying what I'm trying to say in a nutshell, which means to adapt the inventorization methods, the institutional categories, to the artist projects. And that's simple. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Lionel. That was lovely. And yeah, I have to say that I had a great time digging into Ecart archive, and that was a very interesting, also kind of experience of dealing with my own kind of very institutionalized and organized personality somehow, and dealing with this chaos, which I found super inspiring, and finding things that I couldn't find, and dealing with my own frustration. And I have a first question. Is everybody kind of okay with that? So my first question is about this future that you've mentioned. So once John is no longer around, would you like to try to keep this chaotic situation to a certain extent, or will you allow this archive to become entirely a part of the institution in the institutionalized kind of way of so, and how that can happen?
Both. It will become part of the museum responsibility to make this archive accessible to research, partly to the audience, and that has to be defined how. I think it will continue to enrich, but I don't think it's my decision to make sure that it's never fully categorized, inventorized, etc., because I won't be there. At some point, you have to leave your position. But I think it will keep this idea of the categories are fluid.
All right.
So you can shuffle the things from the interest you have. I mean, it's something that everyone experiences within an archive. It can be there, but also there. Mm-hmm. So at some point you have to decide physically it can only exist in one place. In an inventory, digital inventory, it can exist in several places. But at the end, the arborescence is kind of killing the joy of the discovery. So I believe the best access remains physical, and I don't think the place is definite. I think the place can be shuffled and should be reshuffled by research, by other perspectives, by artists who come and do something with it. And I hope they will, even if it's a little problem for the conservation, if they can keep the works with the documents, if they can keep the correspondence with the printed matter or the drawings or whatever, I think that's quite important as well.
Okay, thank you.
I hope.
Let's see. I'm curious. Are there any other questions around? Yes, I mean, go ahead.
You almost answer, but did John give you like instruction about what he wants and what he doesn't want in the future when he will have passed away? And following this link, what about the instruction you will give to the next direction when you will leave the museum?
You know, John, because you realized with some students of the ed, some of the scrolls that Ecart wrote, he doesn't really want to give instructions. He believes that the beauty of these things is that they open works. There's not one realization that is definitely better than the other. And this sense of play is very much at work in anything John did in his life. So no, he didn't give any instructions, and he won't. I am a bit more of a conservator than an artist, so I will probably leave a guideline of what I consider fruitful, functionally speaking, within the archive, but I don't really care of how it looks and how it's operated by the people afterwards. I mean, it's their task to find the best way. The display is just a display. What I would like to insist is that they try to keep the related works together, to not separate the things, which is, of course, an impulse in museums to put things by categories, but for good reasons as well. I mean, the paper was in, some shelving and with a paper atmosphere and controlled more than a 3D object. But at the end, I think that's just a conservator's point of view. It's more important to take in account the artist's point of view. Mm-hmm. We are here because the artists are doing works. They are not here because we conserve their works. Right. They don't need us, we need them.
I think it's a very lovely kind of sentence. Yeah, Hannah, you have a question, right?
Thank you very much. Yes. Well, that was lovely. I just would like to continue on this notion of, serendipity, archival serendipity. And I've heard so much also through Aga about this archive, really very inspiring how you continue to maintain, this kind of principle of chance or contingency in the archive. But I wonder also, whether there might be a productive way to think about this further in terms of perhaps introducing, a digital realm in which perhaps a certain order is established for people who want to access the archive. I mean, scholars or art historians, archival scientists would have probably interest as well in quick finding, right, archival materials. And on the other hand, one could leave the archive, perhaps in such a serendipitous state, on and on, because it gives so much joy. So I wonder whether, you have been thinking about hybrid models of accessibility and serendipity, keep preserving serendipity on the other hand.
I think you're right. I mean, there is a little website that was done during the research project with the ad that maybe Aga can put in the chat. It's called Archive Ecart. It's just like a trace of research. I think it would be great to have a digital model that would allow chance encounters into the material. For instance, if you know the Tate website is interesting because it provides you with topics. I mean, you look for an artist and it proposes you 50 others. It's not an algorithm, it's fields of research that have been carefully selected by the conservators and the curators. I think you can imagine something like that, but in complete disorder. I think that would be great. Like you look for something, but they try to guide you quite the opposite way. I think that would be interesting. It would be a nice project. And then if there would be some money, certainly I think we would find people that would be interested and artists that would be interested to work within that, kind of idea. The reality of an archive is that it is very difficult to inventorize properly and to publish properly because of means. It's economical means, it's human resources, it's tons of things that prevent you from being perfect. So it's also on my mind that I don't believe there's perfection, but I'd rather be pragmatic about what I don't have than being, naive about things I would never have.
That's a good point. I think that it's in such a lovely way, somehow your idea about like this chaotic and inventory that we could actually make to the archive is kind of connected to what actually Patrizio was saying about like an access to the archive which is based on a game or on a play in a Fluxus style somehow. Maybe you two should talk about it together and join forces and actually constructing something like that.
I actually took note of that in my little. No, I think it's a good idea. I mean, again, the concrete poetry cabinet, we made a complete inventory. We will not publish it online as it because it's too many items regarding the size of the collection of the museum. It's also institutional politics. But we will have an Excel file that you can download where you have all the names of all the artists that we keep at least a work from.
All right.
So it's an easy thing. We could do the same for Ecart. But again, I don't think it would necessarily make sense because one of the richness of this archive is that there are a lot of great things done by completely unknown artists today. Like, I dare you to identify them.
Yeah,
really,
right.
with all the technical means that we have today. I dare you to find who actually has done what.
Yes, yeah.
And it's part of the richness of an archive to especially for Fluxus, which was non-hierarchical. They didn't want to make a hierarchy. So why are we building one? They didn't want to make a split between techniques. So why are we building them?
Right.
For me, it's to take that seriously is to just try to leave it more or less as it is, but of course organized so that it can be consulted without being destroyed, identified. I mean, that's still a job to do. We have piles of, as you have seen, mail art, unidentified mail art contributions. It comes from people who go to the archive and look for something, and suddenly they find something. It just happened to us. Someone came from the Brooklyn Museum. They're doing a show on correspondence art in the 70s, and there was one guy specialized in the Bay Area, and he recognized some of the things that I couldn't recognize. I mean, it's like you need to have seen them, and it's, oh, I think this is Anna Banana, and I said, well, I know Anna Banana, but not the I don't know, the secret Dada Land version that I don't know. So he needs people who come and help you to identify things, to continue that. But again, yeah, I think it would be great that if it can be managed as a more active place where you do have experiences as well, even when you research.
Right. Okay. Let's see how that's going to continue to the future. And thank you so much, Lionel, again. So, and now we are inviting Elke, who is a director of Kunstverein in Wiesbaden. Yes, and Elke did a lot of activations in her career, and including she was working with Ben Patterson for a while, and I think we are going to hear about those activations, and I'm really looking forward to it. So over to you, Elke. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Lionel, for the perfect connection to what I probably try to say here. Yes, my talk, what you see is Ben Patterson in front of the building at the opening of his retrospective 2012 in Wiesbaden, the first German solo show he had, age 78. And yeah, I'd just like to guide you through this. So Bla-bla-bla is actually a quote by Ben Patterson from 2012 when he was asked by many journalists, people, art historians to talk about Fluxus, to talk about what's Fluxus today, to talk about what Fluxus has been, and so on. And he was, at some stage, he was a little bit tired of all. Okay? Oh, okay. So I'm talking to you as an exhibition maker from Wiesbaden and confronted with questions of originality. Will be part of this talk, and also I want to give you some examples, if the time is enough, of activating Fluxus in the contemporary exhibition context. I'm down, okay. Okay. So Wiesbaden, as you all know, the big legacy all goes back to 14 concerts in September 1962. And besides a little recording of 6 minutes and the famous poster and a few photographs, which you all know, there is basically nothing left, as in physical or objects. So we are. Okay, now I understand. So I just give you some of the pictures you all know. Dick Higgins, Danger Music, nothing new. You all recognize these images. Even yesterday when we walked to the fabrication here at Bonotos, we saw one picture and all went, oh, this is a Wiesbaden picture. And I really had to laugh because it's a special effect that everybody knows those pictures because there's only such a small amount of them. And as you also all know, Wiesbaden was not very proud in those days about what had happened. And to be honest, Wiesbaden is not proud until today. we have to say that Machunas and Emmett Williams was just as involved, was confronted, or they were confronted with the highest possible disapproval of what they have done by the local bourgeois society. The museum director was almost forced to step back. Same for the mayor of the city. And because the visitors of this event, and you see that the audience hall is not very packed full, that's why I have this picture. And the audience actually had fun watching it. Still, there was a high disapproval and protest against it, because I think most of the visitors came with a completely different expectation. It was announced as a concert, or as concerts, and the title chosen by Machunas, probably by Machunas, was very close to a title what is an old like festival in Wiesbaden since the emperor's time. So we have the emperor's Mai-Festspiele, internationale Mai-Festspiele, and we have George Machunas with the Fluxus International Festspiele, which is very similar. And you can imagine what happened to the Wiesbaden society when they suddenly were confronted with this. The result, I think this is another picture probably most of you would know. It's a famous poster in front of the museum and a real graffiti, so it's scratched in Die Irren sind los, which means the Luniacs are loose. And as you can imagine, what could the city do better than be quiet and hope that people would forget what had happened? Until 20 years later, the private collector Uta and Michel Berger invited René Bloch in 1982 to somehow celebrate Fluxus. I don't understand, it's not a PowerPoint anymore. Okay, that's it's not working. So René Berger and René Bloch made a trilogy. I think he did not know in the beginning that it was going to be a trilogy, but since then, every 10 years, Wiesbaden celebrates Fluxus. So it was in 1982, 1992, and 2002 that we had a big exhibition, and in between, nothing. Absolutely nothing. No scholar, no nothing, absolutely nothing. And 2002 was the year I arrived in Wiesbaden, and just quick background to my biography. I've been working in the Joseph Beuys archive, and I did a lot of database research before I came. I came originally from Cologne, and I was very surprised when I arrived in Wiesbaden that there was nothing regarding Fluxus, because same like you all probably, for me Wiesbaden was the capital of Fluxus in Germany, and I was very amazed that it was not promoted in any way. And I was even more surprised to hear that Benjamin Patterson was living in Wiesbaden, which was obviously not of any interest in the city. So we got into contact. I think we become very good friends, and I had to learn more and more that there was not really anything in the city what we would traditionally see as an artwork, so any remains of Fluxus. So I started off being able to understand why there was no exhibitions about Fluxus, or why there was just basically nothing. The only thing which is left is the famous pike. I'll go this way, I think. No. There's no light. He's gone. Okay, Pike's not there anymore. We had seen that before today. Pike's head for then for head. This is the only piece which is left, and it's actually framed in the museum, and it's taken out whenever there is a special occasion, like every 10 years, and it will be at some place in the city on display, which is also very funny. Now, how to deal with this? Being the director of the local Kunstverein, which is financially and size-wise a relatively small organization, we're about 100 meters away from the museum. And we had a museum director at those days who absolutely didn't want to have anything about Fluxus in his house. And I thought, well, it's a bit of a lost chance. So I thought I'd follow the third part of René Bloch's exhibition, which is Fluxus und die Folgen, the following followers of Fluxus. So basically concentrating on contemporary art and the younger generation picking up ideas of Fluxus. So first of all, I started to add this idea, and of course my voice and my data background in the exhibition making of my regular exhibitions, and try to find or concentrated on finding positions, contemporary positions, who had some aspects of Fluxus in them. And so I started to, with like any opening speech or whatever, I tried to people of Wiesbaden the idea that this is something which comes from Fluxus and you should be proud of it. The other thing I started was a scholarship called Follow Fluxus. And that was referring to Wiesbaden's closeness to the airport, because on two airports, there's actually two airports in Wiesbaden, the military one, which was the base of all the activities of the Fluxus people coming in the 60s. And then there's a big Frankfurt International Airport, and both are like 20 kilometers away from Wiesbaden. So from this point of view, Follow Fluxus, like follow me from the little cars, you know, at the airports, it was maybe the idea to follow you. And so I thought that would be a good idea to build up a future Fluxus network in the contemporary art historian way, but also for artists, to make this aware in Wiesbaden that this is actually something which is known in the whole world, except in Wiesbaden, that there's something like Fluxus. And yes, so and I guess it was also the idea of promoting Wiesbaden a bit in the world. And then the third part was, it was 2002. We had just finished the Fluxus 40 exhibition. I sort of got kind of nervous. Well, there's 10 years, and then it will be Fluxus 50, and that must be really special. And René Block said he won't do another one. So there was kind of pressure on the city of Wiesbaden and on, as well as on me, what to do with Fluxus 50. So first of all, I tried to create an awareness, which is very hard when you've just finished the Fluxus 40 festival, to talk about the one in the next 10 years. And it actually took the 10 years to convince everybody in the city. But so there was a bit of a time pressure, and because things were delayed, like it's always with politicians. But then there was no real idea then, except having a golden anniversary, whatever that meant for art and for Fluxus. So the city of Wiesbaden successfully applied for a state grant, and with this moment, the doors were open for bigger events. And the first thing what they did was they asked a local but very famous design agency to create a corporate design style guide to promote Fluxus 50. This is not a joke. Which was very nice and very modern, but at the same time, when you look carefully at it, it's containing the same images we all know from Wiesbaden from the 60s. So where's the modernism in this? And what was also quite interesting, we were suddenly, the city and all of us were suddenly under that pressure, how to get a certain amount of originality into this celebration without owning anything like maybe the archive Sohm, or there is just nothing, what you could show, what you could do. The pretty obvious idea of inviting a curator didn't appear. And for me, it wasn't not too bad, because I had started already negotiations with Valerie Castle-Oliver, who did the big show in the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. And the only thing I really wanted was to give Ben Patterson his first solo show in Germany, as him living since the 90s in Wiesbaden. And so I was pretty happy about what I was going to do. But and since the money was there, I was relatively relaxed about the outcome of the Fluxus 50. So the city as well decided that Ben Patterson would be the star of the event, and they announced him to be the godfather of Fluxus. He got his own business card printed, godfather of Fluxus. So he was age 78, and here he was suddenly in the middle of all attention, what you could possibly imagine. We had television teams coming in and interviews. And out of this time is a famous quote of him, Bla-bla-bla, because he ended them, most of them like this. So suddenly he gained the cultural prize of the city of Wiesbaden, and the new museum director who just started the year before in November, opens the door for Big Ben. So here we have the same museum where you had the poster in front of before. And Ben was invited to do a pavilion in front of the door of the museum. So he was not in the museum. And of course, Ben made fun out of this, like with almost everything. Here we have 3 ship containers and, a bouncy castle style transparent roof. And as good art historians as we all are, you can read this in different ways. It is a little bit like a parachute wing, but it's also a bouncy castle idea behind it, and it's transparent, and it's all in front of the door of the museum. The containers were basically used, and so I only have a picture where nobody's there, but it was actually quite full most of the time, as a cafe, as a souvenir shop, and a performance area. While we had inside the museum, and here we are back to the good old leftovers of Wiesbaden. Same as the blow-up roof, we had a blow-up poster of 1962, the famous poster which was scratched before. And you see in the background, and that was basically everywhere in the show, the few photos of 62 being extremely enlarged. So they're like about 5 to 6 meters high to give you an impression. And halfway unpacked the exhibition, the IFA exhibition, which had been already traveling since 30 years before it got to Wiesbaden, which was quite impressive. So that was a museum show. And but they basically concentrated on another quite interesting thing, and that was they wanted to repeat the Fluxus Festival of 62. And here we have the audience lecture hall of the same, it's the same space, but as you can see, it's been hardly renovated. It's all white. It's a literally white cube. For the Swiss people, in the first row on the left picture is Stefan Burger, who was the Follow Fluxus dependent in that year. And he had great fun watching all this, because his whole show, everything what he did for us was basically making fun of Wiesbaden celebrating 50 years of Fluxus. And on the right picture, I don't know if you can recognize it, but it's Alison Knowles' piece Shuffle, and redone in the order from left to right. Ben Patterson is the last one, then Geoffrey Hendricks, Willem de Ridder, Eric Anderson, Alison Knowles. So we have Ben and Alison as the original people of 1962, and the 3 in the middle were obviously later on Fluxus artists, but still they were quoted into the show as being the originals. So here we have the original gang from 62, is in memoriam to Adriano Olivetti. And then we have the same piece done in 2012. So we have straw hats. I think they were actually worn in honor to Bonotto, because Bonotto came 2012 to Wiesbaden. Yeah. And yeah, so the question of originality was in the air. And here's just one example for it. This is the double bath by Ben Patterson, originally from 1989. And it was in the collection of Francesco Cons, as far as I know. It still is, yes. And I've heard you have showed it. But as well as Valerie Castle-Oliver, as well as we really wanted to show this piece, but we couldn't get it out because it was still in the archive. And at that stage, nobody could get any artworks out. So Ben had his typical, very easy solution that I just do a new one. So is this the original or is it not? I know that an Italian collector bought this piece out of our exhibition, and it was not Bonotto. So we have at least 2 originals now. So that will be a fun question for later on. Yeah. So Valerie's exhibition was called Born in the State of Fluxus. And I changed the title to Living in Fluxus because we had the great opportunities that Ben Patterson was actually living around the corner, and we could activate the exhibition, which was very similar to the one in Houston, but we could activate the exhibition with the artist. And as you can see, Ben had a fantastic time, and he was there almost every day. And he had a great time, people playing with his artworks, everybody could touch, and there was no barrier whatsoever. And we are in the middle of the Barack Obama's time as a president, and therefore we invented together Super Tuesday, which you all know from the American election system. So every Tuesday night there would be some sort of performance going on, and it would be either Ben himself performing, or he would invite guests, or he would have the audience do something. So he was very flexible when it came to that. Okay. So we had a lot of young people in there, and Ben had a fantastic time, trying to get them aware of what is Fluxus and what can it be today. And he basically tried to cut the ribbon, as in, open up the space for new ideas. And it was actually a fun exhibition. But he was also aware of the massive responsibility he had as being the original of all those Fluxus celebrations going on 50 years later. And as Alison was the only one still alive, and I think also because they were very close friends, he contacted her, and a lot of things what happened during that time were actually they talked about it before, and he got his approval by Alison. Yes, it was like this. Oh, yes, we should do it like this, or we can do it another way. So he sort of doubled his originality with having Alison in contact, and then later on during the show she actually came over. And for one example is we wanted to have the identical lunch for the opening. The museum and the Kunstverein is about 100 meters apart, and we did a table of 100 meters between the two buildings and wanted to have the identical lunch. And then the officials who gave them money from the town of Wiesbaden told us, tuna fish sandwich, not possible. Ecological reasons, not possible. So we decided to talk to Alison, and then we found a solution. As you all know, tuna fish sandwich, wheat toast, lettuce, butter, mayo, and a cup of soup, or a cup of buttermilk. Time? Okay. So here you see the identical lunch. It's like 100-meter long table. And the very first picture showed you Ben. Of course, it wouldn't have been Ben if we would have had buttermilk. So he insisted on pink champagne. You can see the bottles and glasses there on there. And then we also had a bit of a birthday cake, where he's having great fun doing it. So keep on going. So we had a lot of also Super Tuesdays, and this is just an example how the shuffle of Alison notes, which you have seen before in the museum, reinterpreted with the old stars, then reinterpreted in our premises with a school class. And they talked about what could it be alike, and they found that the noise of moving chairs in a classroom is very similar. So they did this performance. So Ben was very happy in, and again, he talked to Alison, but they were very happy in changing those performances slightly into what would be interesting for people dealing with this today. Mm-hmm. So we have all sorts of things happening there. I can't tell them more, but you see there was computer, and Bonato being in Wiesbaden, I'm very proud that it was there. Okay. I hurry up. So this is maybe also interesting. I won't finish this. Okay. 100 years Marcel Duchamp, new descending the stairs. And Ben invited the female performer Patricia German from Poland. And the evening before, she talked to him, and she said, well, it's so easy. If I just perform it, it would be much more interesting if you would perform it as well. And here we have Patricia doing it first, and then afterwards we see Ben Patterson descending the stairs, nude. Quickly, how to deal with documents from the archives. As I said, it was a collaboration with the Houston Art Museum. They had all the originals from the Getty. We, of course, did not get all the originals from the Getty because we are not air conditioned, and besides that, we wouldn't have the money to get that transported and everything. So Ben was very easy with that. He just said, we just make photocopies and tape them on the wall. So you have all those famous documents from the Getty. the photocopy was actually taken from a facsimile we had. And then we just glued them like wallpaper on the wall. And then we put up the ladder. So people actually would have to climb up the ladder to read it or to crawl on the ground to see it. Then we had a very few originals as in paperwork, and they were in vitrines, which were like, had a small air conditioning unit in them. And that's basically the end of the show. We did tour at the very end. And the tour was from the Kunstverein back to the museum. People were blindfolded. They had to follow Ben, as you can see. And once we arrived at the museum, we were allowed to take off our paper hats. And then suddenly things happened. So people climbed up the goatee in front of the museum and so on. Very quick rush. Now, 2022, we had 6 years of Fluxus. And as you can see, the idea of having a graphic designer to design the festival is still very vivid. Due to the pandemic, the city of Wiesbaden decided to move the celebrations to 2023. As we had already negotiated with the Archive for our show, I said, no, I will do my celebrations in 2022. So we started last year already. And basically did a whole year of Fluxus. The theme that year, again, without a curator for the whole event, was the women of Fluxus, and referring to the piano destruction, the piano activity in Wiesbaden. I decided that we do a show on music, and especially on the piano, because I still feel a lot of misunderstanding, especially in Wiesbaden, about what happened in '62. So we had a lot of beautiful pianos from the archive. I just see that the courtesy line is gone.
My God, no courtesy.
No, but it's there, but it's not on the PDF. I don't know why. So we did Mary Baumeister, a solo show, and we connected to the contemporary art with Andrea Büttner, who has a piano destruction piece. I have to race through Takako Saito. And as you can see, the show was always packed and a lot of action going on. And this is maybe an interesting part as well. We did little nightstands for each of the artists who we found from the female artists so far. And any of the nightstands you were allowed to open and do things with whatever was there. So you could have a glass of wine, or you could eat a banana or whatever. So finished.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, right. So yes, thank you. I mean, that's just such a wonderful story, Elke, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I think that, I mean, we will have a lot of questions, but maybe we can just save them to the afternoon panel, because we are running a little bit behind the time. So with this, I would like to invite another Elke, Allgaier, from this time from the archive Sohm. Yes, thank you so much, Elke, for joining us today. Elke is a curator and head of the Stadtgalerie Archive department. This is a research institute that holds 4 major archival bequests, which is Fluxarchive of Hans Sohm, Archive Oskar Schemmler, Archive Wilgromen, and Künstlerischer Nachlass Adolf Holzer. I hope I'm pronouncing it kind of acceptably, at least. Yes, again, we are happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I am pleased to be here and present a short history of the Archive Sohm, and to give you some insights into our activities in order to explore the aspect of today's discussion, the activation of sometimes unorthodox archival and artistic material. Here you see the building of our archive. We are located in the Stuttgart City Center district, and are part of the Staatsgalerie Museumsbuilding campus. Our archives comprise the first floor. This photo was taken 4 weeks ago when the magnolia trees are blooming. If you plan to visit our archives, you can schedule an appointment in order to research the holdings as far as they are accessible. Here you see the study room. On the right hand, you can see the compact shelving of the holdings archived in the archive boxes and folders. Let's have a glimpse on our whole museum campus. From the aerial image on the left hand, you can see two distinctly different museum buildings. The mid-19th century old gallery campus, on the right hand, the extension, the new gallery, an icon of postmodernism architecture built by the British architect James Fraser Stirling and opened to the public in 1984. The building reflects also the diversity of our collections, whose foundings go back to the beginnings of the 19th century related to the graphic department, followed by the collection of paintings and sculpture. In contrast to the established departments, the archives are the youngest collection formation, which goes back to the late 1960s until 1970, when the state of Baden-Württemberg developed a new approach to a modern and contemporary museum. Following this shift to explore archival material within a society evolving, the museum received its founding holdings. First, a bequest of Will Krohmann, an artist historian who was a famous networker since the 1920s, and a few years later, the bequest of Oskar Schlemmer, which was donated to our collections. When the postmodern new building was under construction, this was also the time when the state of Baden-Württemberg agreed with Hans Sohm to take over his famous archive and collection of happening Fluxus, Vienna actionism, concrete poetry, beat and underground material. Thereby, a new basis for the archival department was created. In order to understand the archive Sohm, we should go back to the roots of this special private archive. How it started. Hans Sohm was a German dentist who resided in a small town outside in Stuttgart in Münchingen and since 1964 in Markgröningen. His professional life didn't seem to be the important thing to him. He was interested in avant-garde publishing ventures and explored very early in the beginnings of the 60s the happening and Fluxus movement. One of the pivotal impulses was his acquaintance with an unorthodox publishing venture called the Eremitenpresse, during this time based near Frankfurt am Main in Stierstadt. The Eremitenpresse, literally translated hermit press, was a hotspot of critical cultural contributions during 1954 and 1972. From 1960 onwards, Hans Sohm subscribed to the Streitzeitschrift, a quarterly published journal. Here you see 5 copies of the Streitzeitschrift from 1960 to 1968. Streitzeitschrift is more than a title. It can be interpreted in 2 different ways: a dispute journal or a dispute time scriptures. There you find contributions of, for instance, Peter Handke, Bason Brock, Fritz Bauer, and other contemporary thinkers. Let's tackle the next question. How has the collection developed? In the early 1960s, Hans Sohm focused his interest on contemporary avant-garde publishing ventures, especially the products of small independent publishers. In 1962, during a visit to Munich, I think he wasn't in Wiesbaden, as far as I'm informed. During a visit to Munich, he met up with Gruppe Spur, and during this year, he established contacts to Wolf Vostell, Hermann de Vries, Daniel Sperry, and Dieter Roth. This was the moment when he was not only a bibliophilic, but an avid collector. He started to archive every scrap of paper he could find on happenings and events and avant-garde enterprises. He didn't simply amass artifacts, but rather took an archival approach to his growing collection. He handled the material like an archivist. This is the way his collection was organized. The bungalow in which Hans Sohm lived with his partner was filled to the brim. Hans Sohm deposited his material, books, magazines, periodicals, manifestos, posters, programs, and any kind of printed or autographed material, correspondence in his house. There are shelves after shelves full of material, well organized, but not indexed. Thus, Hans Sohm assumed multiple roles: archivist, sponsor, chronologist, curator, active participant, documenting photographer, and so on. In 1970, he published his catalogue, Happening and Fluxus, a timeline of the Fluxus-related events. Furthermore, he supported a creative approach to present archival material to an interested public. Here you see a sketch of a ground plan for the exhibition Happening and Fluxus at the Art Society in Cologne in 1970, where Hans Sohm presented his documents as a timeline resembling a street. He called his project Documentation Street, analog to a book street, which shows the special arrangement of the book manufacturing process. On the slide, you see the floor plan of the central documentation street in Cologne. After Cologne, the exhibition toured to Stuttgart to the Baden-Württemberg Art Society. The documentation street is a central aspect of the exhibition Happening and Fluxus, and shows how Hans Sohm activated his collection and reached out to the public. He presented his archival material in transparent folding pockets and fixed them to the presentation wall. He took a very basic and functional approach. Hans Sohm also collaborated with artists. For instance, he worked with Richard Hamilton to prototype the multiple named The Critic Laughs. He used a Brown electrical toothbrush sold by Brown with a set of false teeth so that the critic can laugh as needed. In another collaboration, Hans Sohm filled sausage casings with works by German author Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and labeled these with a book cover. Roth called the arrangement Werke in 20 Bänden, works in 20 volumes. So this was a collaboration together with Dieter Roth. Meanwhile, Hans Sohm pursued to give his collection a representative outline. He created his Flux shop situated in the basement of his house, started in 1973. Here we see him amidst his Flux shop. His archives are meant for the public, or rather for interested and qualified individuals to whom he made copies, or he lent whatever he could and whomever he could help to in locating materials. As a networker, he attracted researchers to come to his archives and to do part of their work at his archive. in 1975, he sent material from Mark Groningen to the States. And Sohm accepted to present his collection at the temporary exhibition space at the Clock Tower Gallery, Leonard Street, New York. Here we are. The Village Voice noted, exhibitions like this are a little difficult to digest because there is no striking visual material, just the mementos of ephemeral events. Lots of little scraps of this and that, programs, polemics, photos. But even so, these scraps are evocative of the high humor and mischievous dislocation of preconceptions that this group of international troubadours has brought to the art world. So Hans Sohm's exhibits wandered from Mark Groningen to New York and back. Finally, the magic multicolored spaceship landed in Stuttgart. When the archive was moved from its private origins to the State Museum, Hans Sohm was looking eagerly forward to the new possibilities to open his holdings to the public. Here the glass showcases hold Fluxus exhibits in the Neue Staatsgalerie Stuttgart. Here's the timeline of the publications created by the team of the Staatsgalerie, exhibition catalogs, standard works in regard to our holdings, Festschrift, or the Festschrift for Hans Sohm. The Archive Sohm was activated also under the curatorial point of view. Currently, we are presenting a retrospective exhibition of the work of Alison Knowles captured in photographs from our archive. This was supported by the Wüstenrot Stiftung, which is a Baden-Württemberg-based building society. So far, we are enjoying a great interest by the public, as shown by surprisingly high visitor numbers. This is a view on our key visual designed as large size banner in front of the new Staatsgalerie. The exhibition has also been very favorably viewed by the German press. Especially, I love very much the headlines, a powerful concretization of Fluxus' idea, the sound of squishy Nivea peas, for instance, or even a haircut becomes a happening. Yeah, this is a view on the presentation of Serenade for Alison by Nam June Paik we show at the moment. We are also able to integrate an actual work of art into our exhibition, a compelling reinterpretation of Alison Knowles' performance of Nivea Cream Peas. Originally, Alison Knowles' Nivea Cream Peas is destined to be in the context of physical contact of performance. In contrast, the reinterpretation of this collective work was performed and documented during the lockdown in London in 2021 as solo version in an isolation context. Thus, we are viewing an image that shows the activation of a historical Fluxus concept. Moreover, we invited the artistic venture called Schreibbude, literally translated writing booth, to be inspired by Fluxus and to interact with the visitors. Last week, the Stuttgart-based writing booth turned our exhibition rooms into an action area. On historical typewriters, the creatives of the writing booth typed instructions for actions, sometimes at the call of the visitors, or they were directly inspired by the exhibits. This resulted in fascinating poems and paperworks, and birthday greetings to Alison Knowles, who turned 90 last weekend. By the way, we expand and make accessible our exhibition idea via internet. For instance, via our online presence, our digital collection. There is a tile with 149 exhibits you can explore digitally. The tile will be taken down after the exhibition is closed, and it will be integrated permanently into our digital collection. This is an excerpt of our exhibition tile. And here is another expansion of our exhibition via internet through a YouTube playlist with outstanding examples. The playlist was curated by our trainee, who researched the infinite expanses of the published Fluxus-related contributions on YouTube. You can fetch the playlist via QR code. We present the code at the entrance of the exhibition, so you can reach the list directly via smartphone. So check it out, and if you are around in Stuttgart, feel free to drop by.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elke. That was a wonderful presentation. Congratulations on the amazing work that you have done with the Alison Knowledge Show. I am looking forward to see it. Are there any questions to Elke?
I have one.
All right.
Commentary and then question. Well, we talked about this already. I think it's I love the way that Hans Sohm, that he cooperated with the artists.
Mm-hmm.
This is one thing, very good. And this idea of not indexing, like Lionel said, is about the Ecart, but having an order. Whatever this order is without index, we don't know exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find mostly fascinating is that Hans Sohm started collecting in 1961, and then exactly 20 years later, he gave us also his Archive in the Staatsgalerie.
Yeah.
Do you know anything more about this? Did he then start a new collection?
No, he didn't. He continued to support the museum with his knowledge. And this was a great step forward to the future, because he was aware of his collection, of the importance of his collection. And he wanted to be sure that all this knowledge didn't get lost. So when he was 60 years old, he gave it to the Staatsgalerie. This is an age where many collectors start to build up collections. In Hans Sohm, he started 20 years earlier, and then he said, now it's a point where I want to be sure that this collection will not be destroyed in different directions, that it will be together at one in one hand. And so he contacted the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart, and this was a great decision.
Okay, that's interesting. I have actually one question. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to use this privilege. I'm just kind of wondering about this amazing original kind of the kind of Sohm's way of actually putting all the material together. And I'm just wondering if that is kind of kept, it is preserved, this order by Sohm, or how actually this archive has been integrated in the museum.
As you know, archivists never destroy the order if they receive a request. Even if you don't understand the logic of this order, you don't start to build up a new order. So this order was kept, and it was developed and expanded, and we do index the collection, and we do inventorize the works and the archival material. We work as archivists and as curators. And if you
have the task to find new ideas for an exhibition. Maybe you don't think in the categories of an archivist. You are more free, and you should forget all these structures. No, this is an answer to Lionel and to his ideas. So you should think as curator, and if you work with a material or you are organizing an exhibition, you need a structure, otherwise you are lost with all this material. Mm-hmm. Also, if you do digitization projects, so it is very important to inventorize the collection, but you should work as curator and as archivist
at the same time. Okay, thank you so much. That is clarifying a lot.
Yeah, my question was close to yours, but just to maybe precise. So, if I remember well, the archive today is organized by alphabetical order per artist or per person, right? So that means that at the moment the collection was private, it was already organized by artists, is it?
It was in an alphabetical order by artists, but it depends a bit. You should talk to our archivist, also to my colleague, and we will help you to find your specific topics. Yeah.
So that's how the accessibility actually works, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Who has another question?
I do. I was just I was wondering how because some things are more from what I understood, there was more kind of a collection, which is kind of, it's perhaps not as accessible. It's more within the museum, and then there's the archival space, which is where the more kind of documents kind of are. And I was just wondering, actually what's the, because all of it is kind of within the same archive, but I was just wondering what the difference between these two spaces were, and whether if, for example, sometimes the documents, they would come together with maybe more like aesthetic objects, but then they get separated kind of in like maybe this process of transfer.
Thank you very much for that very interesting question. Yes, we have different kind of archival material, also artworks, and we have different storage rooms, of course. We have storage rooms directly like you saw it. This was the archival material, the paper works, but we have some more rooms in our house. Yeah, it's true.
So can I just follow up on this question briefly? So because on the one, so I'm just kind of maybe I'm trying to be controversial as usual, but I understand that was the order, and you said the actual original order has been respected when the archive got into the collection of the museum, but then you are saying that to a certain extent it has been reshuffled, it has been separated, right? I mean, I'm just curious about, for example, the Josie, the paper gliders that Josephine presented today. So they were in the original collection of Sohm. Were they considered an artwork? Were they kept like separately? And how that kind of translates now in the museum reality?
They are they are stored in with the artworks
from the collection.
Yes,
and the archive is kind of there is a separation, right? I'm just trying to understand.
The location is in
a physical location.
The physical location, exactly. Yeah.
But just to follow up on this, and it's magnificent that this is going down this way. This kind of activation of the archive implies it's perhaps also perpetuation and living on. And I wonder whether this has to do with the question of the access. And I think that this is also something that Josephine really nicely gets at. Whether, I mean, I have never, I must say, not yet accessed the archive, and we are still looking forward to do this, but in different Fluxus archives, the question of access actually kind of determines what you learn about the archive and how, what kind of knowledge is produced, and what kind of what kind of life kind of is generated on the spaces. So I wonder, is there a question, is there a different access between, the archival, so to say, papers in your collection and the collection, so to say, proper? That's, just to put it in very blunt terms.
Yeah, I try to explain it in a short way. There are items who are deposited in the painting and sculpture department, physical storage place. So if you are interested in visiting this specific artwork, you should tell us before you come, and not come to Stuttgart and then have the idea, I want to see this and that, and we have to organize also. This is the reason why we make visits by appointment, and we also ask the visitors, please give us some keywords we can prepare material. This is the way archives work generally. Yeah.
How many people come to visit in a year?
In a year, there come 20, 30, it depends, it's different. Last year's we had not so many visitors, but
Okay, that amount, that range.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Elke and for Archive Sohm? So I think I don't see anything from the public. I think everyone is kind of looking for a coffee break, and we are going to save some questions maybe and think about them and shoot them during the panel session in the afternoon. So thank you so much to all of you in the room and online, and see you in an hour. We are going to be back at 4:30 with a panel discussion, and the panel discussion would also be open to the questions from the public. So I hope to see you back in 1 hour. Thank you so much.